we're going to talk about worms and the different types of worms. So here we see an earthworm, and it's an annelid, as we saw before. It has rings on its body, but other types of worms might not have rings, but they most likely have a long cylindrical body, and they have no bones. They're also not an insect because they have no exoskeleton, and they don't have 6 legs. They're not spiders because they do, or arachnids because they don't have 8 legs. So these are called invertebrates, and these are called worms. There are some worms that are worms that are good worms, and we have earthworms that aerate our soil, make it have air and water in it. We have leeches. We have planaria, composting worms, or called nematodes. We have bristle worms. We have turbolarians. These are worms that exist, that don't damage us, that don't hurt our bodies. Then we have some worms that do hurt our bodies or do hurt other animal bodies. And these are parasites. Parasites need other animals to live, and they live in other animals' bodies. And they might make us sick. So the first ones we're going to learn about are the earthworms. They have soft skin, they have rings on their bodies, and if you look at them very closely, they have little bristles on their body, little hairs that help them move. They do not have ears or eyes. Leeches are another type of segmented worm or annelid, and they, just like the earthworm, don't have ears. They might have, some of them might have eyes, but what makes these different from earthworms is that they have suckers on either side of their body that helps them stick on to animals where they can suck blood out of them. That's how they eat. Or they can stick onto surfaces so that if they're living in water, the current doesn't make them float away. Bristle worms are also different types of worms that are also segmented. These are mostly marine. That means they live in oceans all around our world. And they're called bristle worms because, as you can see, the little hairs on their bodies are more noticeable. And they might sting you if you touch them. So it helps them be protected from animals that might think they might make a yummy snack. Now, these are flatworms. These worms can't breathe except through their skin. So they only have one opening in their body to intake water, to intake food, and then to excrete it or to get rid of the waste. They live in water or land, and the ones that live in land, these turbolarians, they go out at night and they live in dark, wet places like in leaf piles or in rotting wood. So these are turbolarians. And these are planarians. And planarians are also flatworms like the turbolarians, but these are very special worms because if you cut a planarian in half, each one of those parts will become a worm itself, a planarian. And if you cut a planarian into 5 parts, you're going to end up with 5 worms that are able to live and reproduce. So scientists use planarians to study and find out how we can help humans regenerate, because if we were to cut off our finger, it doesn't grow back. If we cut off an arm, we can't make it grow back. So we want to learn from planarians how they get to do it. Now these are a different type of flatworm, like the planarian, but it's called a fluke. They have suckers like the leeches, but they're called parasites because the only way they can live is if they attach themselves to an animal. And we are animals, right? And so it could attach to our bodies too. Inside our bodies or outside our bodies. This is another flatworm called a tapeworm. And they can infect us. They can go into our bodies. And they can make us sick or become very uncomfortable. And dogs and cats, for example, are some of the pets that we have at home that might get tapeworms because they tend to go outside and play or step on other animals' poop that might have tapeworms. And if they're licking themselves, they get the tapeworm eggs inside their bodies. Now, we wouldn't do that, would we? But we still touch surfaces with our hands, and then without washing them, we put them in our mouth. Guess what? We could be swallowing some tapeworm eggs. And so, very important that we don't touch our faces or our mouths, because not only viruses can hurt us, worms can too. A pinworm is another type of worm that is a parasite. That means that it's going to live inside our bodies. And this is probably the most common parasite that children have. And children get it because their bum is itchy and they scratch it. And they don't realize that now they have pinworm eggs in their fingernails because they were scratching. And instead of washing their hands with soap and water, they forget or they don't wash them very well, and then they touch things. And then other children might come and touch those surfaces or those toys, put them in their mouth, and then swallow the eggs. So if you find, it's very common and it's very easy to get rid of. So if you find that your bum is itchy a lot, especially in the morning, you might want to get checked out by a doctor and see if you have some pinworms, and then there's medication that you can take to get you to feel better. And then not all of these roundworms are bad, because these are compost nematodes. A nematode is another name for a compost, and there are many, many types of nematodes, just like the pinworms. But these eat up insects that hurt our plants. So these are worms that might live in our compost. But sometimes if we do not have them in our compost, we can buy them and add them to our soil. And then these nematodes will eat the eggs or the larvae of insects that are not very good for our plants, that might eat our tomatoes or zucchinis, etc. So worms can be very, very, very helpful to us and help us a lot. And some of them might make us very sick. So it's important to know that there's a lot more about worms than just our wrigglers that we find in our garden. I hope you enjoyed this lesson.